So Nick, let's start with The Hunt for Zero Point, which is your best-selling book on Black projects from the aerospace defense world. Now, you published that nearly 2 decades ago, and I'm wondering, have you been surprised by the relevance and the continued relevance, as well as the public reaction to it that it's had over the last 2 decades?
Well, I have been surprised by it, really, Tim. And I guess in part because for a long time, I just put it on a shelf. I put it on the shelf and it just stayed there. I never sort of re-examined it. I went on to do other things. So for about sort of a decade or more, I didn't revisit it at all. And people would contact me, of course, about, some of the stuff that's in the book. But I was, rather perhaps unkindly dismissive of that sometimes. I mean, in that I didn't quite appreciate some of the impact that it had had. And of course, people wanted to talk about it. But for me, I'd sort of, for a while, as I'm trying to explain, I guess I kind of tried to move on and away from it. It was so all-encompassing for me for the 10 years that I've been doing the research that I wanted to go on to other things afterwards. But what I'm really gratified about now is that a lot of the themes in it have started to come back. In fact, they've started to surface for the first time, some of them. And when I sort of dipped back into the book again to sort of try and wonder or try and answer the question as to why people were interested in it again, I did see that it had relevance today that I really found surprising. And I'm glad too, in that sort of, it hasn't become outdated as I thought it might, which, is for me is a very gratifying thing. And I'm delighted now to be talking about it again, because it all feels to me fresh and new. And, I'm kind of exploring the issues with everyone else, almost like it's the first time.
Yeah. Well, and I should apologize for jumping around a little bit in the questions, but when you mentioned trying to get away from it, one of the things that I've noticed is, and this is just my perception, as journalists, you kind of you dip into the water of all of these different little ponds, right? And so as an aerospace reporter, I know you used to go to conferences, report on new technology, and then for Zero Point, I mean, you were heavily involved, but that's only one project in a large scope of interest and work. So I think maybe one of the challenges is perhaps it's almost like with actors, where they worry about being stereotyped, right? I'm not sure if that resonates at all, but that's one of the things I wondered, because I have that as well. I have many different interests, and so when I'm writing about a topic, it's a little bit of a challenge sometimes to kind of pull back from that and say, okay, this project is done, now I'm moving on.
Oh, I definitely go along with that. I mean, I'm a complete polymath. And although my core interest, my background, my training was and is in aerospace and defense, I've got a lot of interest outside of that. And the Hunt for Zero Point tapped into many of them. I mean, people will be aware that in addition to the exploration of a technology frontier, there was also some history in there. I'm very interested in World War II. There's also some sort of ideology in there. What is the what are the sort of the sort of mind/consciousness implications of a new energy source? So all of that sort of came into play in the Hunt for Zero Point in a way. And yeah, I for a while I tried to put it into a sort of silo and move on, and did. I mean, I perhaps we'll discuss some of them. I went on to other areas, and then, as I say, I came back to it. I mean, initially I was dragged back to the Hunt for Zero Point, almost kicking and screaming. But actually, in the past couple of years, and it'd be interesting for us perhaps to explore what has made the book come back again. I suspect that some of it is Tic Tac related. The sightings of or the encounters of the U.S. Navy of its 2 carrier battle groups in the Pacific and the Atlantic, of a UAP encounter, unidentified aerial phenomena, formerly known as UFOs. I think that might explain some of it, but I don't think it explains all of it. So you probably have better ideas on that than I do.
Yeah. Well, it is intriguing. You know, there was an enormous revelation in the Hunt for Zero Point when you talked about the Nazi bell. So I think that the Nazi bell was probably the biggest revelation in the book, which was a secret project that Polish defense journalist Igor Witkowski discovered initially at the Wenceslas mine in Poland. So back when you wrote the book, it was conjectured that the Nazis were trying to build some new kind of propulsion system. But since then, scientists have suggested that the facility might have been used for refining thorium for the German nuclear bomb program. Have you been able to find anything more out about the Nazi Bell project?
Yes. I guess a year or two after the Hunt for Zero Point was published, I became involved in an attempt to track down one of the arch antagonists of the Hunt for Zero Point, Hans Kammler. For those who wouldn't know about Hans Kammler, he was a SS general, very senior one, appointed by Hitler to, at the end of the war, to oversee all Nazi Germany's secret weapons projects. Kammler disappeared off the face of the earth at the end of the war. And what I found deeply suspicious was that there were sort of 6 different accounts of his death, which is kind of a surefire pointer to the fact that, his disappearance was not coincidental, and he went somewhere. So with a band of researchers, we set out to find what happened to him. Now, I'm not going to steal their thunder, because actually these guys went on to write a book about it, and it came out last year. And it was called The Hidden Nazi. And it was written by a guy called Colm Lowery and Dean Reuter and Keith Chester. 3 of them wrote it. And they found, or rather, actually, we found Kammler this is when I was involved in it. But I had other things going on, and they went on to write the book. It's a compelling read, because at the heart of it, and at the heart of your question, is the whole issue of the Nazis' development of an atomic bomb. There is a sort of, weirdly, a white world version of this story, and there's a black world version of this story. The white world story is about the official development of the German atomic weapon, which was run through Werner Heisenberg's program. Didn't come to anything, as we all know, thank goodness. But there was a secret SS-run project behind that, which Kammler had oversight of. And in the Hunt for Zero Point, whilst, of course, that was pursuing an energy and anti-gravity theme, and Igor Witkowski, particularly, was looking at the bell as the source, possibly, of all kinds of weird experimentation into the manipulation of time and space. Actually, the simpler explanation, and one which the Hunt, touches on as probably more likely, was some kind of attachment to the German bomb program. So, and that actually, without a shadow of a doubt to me, that now is what it was involved in. I mean, it may have had some spin-off application to something to do with, the rotation of magnetic fields, and magnetic fields having some spin-off application to propulsion. But I genuinely don't think that's where it was intended to go. And it was some form of, I think, some form of enrichment device for this SS-run atomic bomb program.
And it's interesting, actually. I think it was Eric W. Davis who had told me, this was several years ago, but he was talking about thorium refining. There was there was thorium in the mountains. I hope it was thorium. And then he said, I said, well, what about the fly trap? And he said, well, those were supports for a cooling tower for the water. And I thought, that does make a lot of sense. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it does.
yeah,
And actually, somewhere in the hunt, it says that. It says, well, it could be the fly trap, or it could be the cooling tower for some form of, or the support stand for a cooling tower in an atomic weapons program. But, the one thing I think one should never do in this business is remain fixed and rigid to a single explanation, because, this is an ever fluid landscape, I think, this whole business of, whether you're looking into alternative energy, experimentation, whether you're looking into stories about UFOs, whatever it might be in that domain, one would be very foolish, I think, to adopt a rigid sort of stand on these issues, because new information comes in all the time, and I think one should reserve the right to change one's opinion.
I also wanted to jump back to Tic Tac, because you mentioned that earlier, and I've got a note here to jump back. But I mean, that's probably one of the most intriguing stories that I think has come out of the defense environment in the last few years. They released the Tic Tac video, which was the USS Nimitz battle group encounter, I guess. And personally, I'm impressed by the openness that they had in coming forward with it. I guess it was leaked before they went public with it, but nonetheless, So I guess, what are your thoughts in general on how Tic Tac changes things, or does it change things? I guess I'm trying to find it's that search for meaning, right? It's out there, it's making waves, people are talking about it. Now, personally, I'm trying to understand, what does this mean?
Well, I find this intriguing because, 5 years ago, I wouldn't have touched the Tic Tac story with a barge pole. It was, to someone of my background, it would have been toxic. There was so much, it wasn't just the whiff of conspiracy about it. It was sort of, the whiff of unreality, surrealness, all of that. But then, strangely and miraculously, the US Navy steps in after these stories have come out. Oh, and and along the way, as you said, the New York Times had reported on it. And the US Navy goes, this is real. This happened to us. It is genuinely baffling to us. We have been buzzed by UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. They're very careful to say what that is, or rather, they're careful not to say what they think that might be. They stick to the facts. It is unidentified aerial phenomena, nothing more. But still, the videos are released. Directives go out to Navy pilots that they can now report on this stuff without fear of that stigma that was previously attached to reporting on UFOs. And suddenly, for me, it's sort of like, whoa, I can talk about this stuff. And it's not just me either. Other people in and around the aerospace and defense field are talking about it, because it's kosher and acceptable now to be able to do that, because the US Navy has admitted that there is a phenomenon that needs to be accounted for and explained. So what do I see? I've seen, other, contemporaries of mine at Janes. Brian Bender used to be a reporter for Janes. He's now at Politico, and Brian has been leading, the stories on Tic Tac and other aspects of, these Navy encounters, which, as people know, have now been opened up to congressional inquiry in the US. So what does it all bespeak? A shift, I think. I do think it speaks of a consciousness shift. We are undergoing now a year of, let's hope it's not much more than a year of pandemic and lockdown, and all the sort of the mental shifting that has brought with it. But with Tic Tac and the Navy's admission and UFOs, I think it's telling us that reality is not as simple as we have come to think of it as being. Reality is very fluid. We see only a fraction of it. We've probably become conditioned over millions of years only to see a fraction of it, the stuff that we need for our survival. And somehow buried within realms and behind, a sort of shimmering veil, there are other things that we cannot account for, but which are now manifest. I mean, they're out there. People are talking about them. So I think we're in for quite an interesting decade in which we're undergoing a profound consciousness shift because of the impact of COVID, and we realize that we're not as secure as we like to think we are. But there are other things happening as well. There are strange paranormal phenomena that are now being talked about, which speak to and of things that we don't understand. And I think we need to be candid about that and go, we're not as clever as we like to think we are. And there are still things about our world, about our universe, that we don't begin to understand. And I think that's exciting.